If you find yourself clinging to ancient hurts, bygone disappointments, or unidentifiable worries, please know that your experience is shared by many. I have walked that exact path, navigating days that felt immensely burdened, as though I were dragging an invisible trunk packed with heavy regrets. Memories of former connections and personal missteps constantly occupied my thoughts, draining my vitality, fracturing my focus, and leaving me to wonder if authentic liberty would ever be within my reach. Through this struggle, I uncovered a profound truth that I am eager to pass along to you. Releasing these burdens does not equate to erasing your history or throwing in the towel. Rather, choosing to untether yourself is the ultimate reclamation of your personal sovereignty, because when you finally discard what fails to nourish your spirit, you intentionally clear a path for tranquility, insight, and personal evolution. I define this transformative process as the awakening of the intellect, a concept rooted in my own history, having once anchored my identity to a major career setback for an extended duration. A single miscalculated path convinced me that my entire professional worth was permanently damaged, causing my thoughts to spin every single morning in a destructive cycle of remorse and hypothetical scenarios. The reality of the situation was that the historical facts were completely unchangeable, yet I possessed the absolute authority to alter how those events resonated within my current existence. Once I committed to observing my thoughts objectively, relinquishing the pain, and cultivating internal liberty, I unlocked the capacity to exist with heightened awareness, bolder confidence, and deep serenity. This realization serves as the foundation for the text before you, designed to assist you in discarding unseen anchors, dismantling internal limitations, and achieving psychological liberation through a continuous daily ritual rather than a solitary milestone. Throughout the upcoming 8 sections, we shall analyze the specific phases of this progression, beginning with identifying the mental barricades that restrict your potential, moving through the dismissal of old emotional residue, altering destructive cognitive patterns, establishing firm personal boundaries, and practicing deep self-care, whilst ultimately welcoming transformation and establishing daily rituals for psychological independence. Every section offers actionable strategies, introspective inquiries, and grounding affirmations to solidify your advancement and convert theoretical knowledge into tangible execution. You possess the capability to initiate this shift at this very moment, keeping in mind that authentic transformation is generated from within, meaning no external force can execute this release or mend your heart on your behalf. My role is simply to offer my personal narrative, observations, and frameworks, whereas the actual implementation and ultimate metamorphosis remain entirely in your hands, requiring not a massive leap, but merely an initial, modest stride forward to guide you toward the liberation you rightly earn. Take a moment to look at your reflection and honestly evaluate what burdens you continue to harbor that no longer provide value to your existence, considering what you can discard today to invite harmony and mental clarity into your world. This is far from an idealistic exercise. It demands real engagement, and your direct insights will serve as the foundation for the upcoming 8 sections, acting as essential components for rebuilding your cognitive focus, your feelings, and your destiny. You will soon realize that surrendering these weights is never a demonstration of vulnerability, but rather the ultimate source of fortitude that empowers you to exist genuinely, make intentional choices, and feel completely vibrant. Each segment functions as a sturdy block for engineering a flexible, peaceful, and sovereign version of yourself, and I shall remain by your side throughout, offering my own trials and wisdom as a dedicated guide so you may navigate this terrain and emerge completely renewed. Ultimately, understand that psychological autonomy is not a fleeting destination, but the collective outcome of conscious decisions, deliberate movements, and daily mindfulness, meaning that if you dedicate yourself to this path, you will transcend mere release and learn to exist with profound intent, unencumbered by yesterday. Let us commence this process immediately without pausing or allowing doubt to intervene, stepping boldly into the opening segment to unlock the incredible potential of mastering internal surrender. The initial section highlights the philosophy of release, emphasizing that advancing through life is virtually impossible when you remain anchored to the elements that pull you downward. I distinctly recall the exact moment the true value of detachment became clear to me, during a period when I was harboring deep bitterness toward an old associate who had shattered my confidence and abandoned our bond. Every single past engagement and memory rotated through my consciousness like an endless loop, triggering waves of irritation, melancholy, and a nagging perception of personal inadequacy, yet I stubbornly refused to let it go. I persisted because discarding the grudge felt synonymous with capitulation, as though letting the matter rest meant I was conceding a loss in the situation. However, the harsh reality is that nurturing animosity provides absolutely no security and instead builds a mental stockade around your potential, leading me to recognize that my consciousness had become an internal jail where the instrument of liberation resided entirely within my own grasp. Choosing to release a burden is never a sign of defeat. It is the ultimate assertion of your internal mastery, representing a conscious preference for tranquility over arrogance, lucidity over turmoil, and progress over stagnation. A vast majority of individuals transport heavy psychological weight through their daily routines completely unawares, whether it manifests as a historical blunder, a dissolved partnership, or an enduring anxiety. This distress dominates your morning reflections and accompanies you into sleep, coloring your daily interactions, exhausting your stamina, and severely restricting your capacity to experience life to the fullest. I have inhabited that exhausting space myself, remembering countless hours spent anchored to my desk entirely drained of energy, not from professional duties, but from the relentless cognitive replaying of circumstances completely beyond my power to alter. Every external reminder or random thought provoked an immediate wave of irritation, forcing me to confront the reality that this psychological weight was mine alone to dissolve. Retaining these burdens does not signify internal fortitude. Rather, it depletes your vitality, intensifies your reactivity, and diminishes your existence, yet the act of releasing feels inherently unnatural because your consciousness instinctively fights against absolute freedom while your pride falsely suggests that safety vanishes the moment you let go. Though true mastery only begins when you surrender the false notion that you can govern the past. There is a foundational truth that guides my existence every single day, which is that relinquishing a burden never represents a loss, but rather a profound reclamation of your psychological territory and personal sovereignty. If you analyze the dynamics of the mind, it becomes evident that shedding what fails to nurture your spirit immediately establishes an environment where innovation, mental clarity, and profound serenity can flourish, because it is simply impossible to evolve while dragging dead weight through your life. Your internal sentiments, cognitive patterns, and psychological attachments function entirely as instruments, meaning that you possess the absolute authority to determine whether they construct your future or restrict your advancement. Consider the physical sensation of gripping a heavy boulder in your palm, where every single instance of resentment, remorse, or anxiety places an additional stone into your grasp, forcing you to navigate existence completely burdened, with tightened shoulders and shallow breathing. Now picture the deliberate act of opening your fingers and allowing that boulder to crash to the earth, noticing how the strain instantly departs your body, your posture relaxes, and your lungs expand fully, which serves as the exact physical manifestation of emotional detachment. In our daily lives, these boulders manifest as intangible obstacles such as historical errors, old grudges, and restrictive self-beliefs, yet the underlying reality remains identical because unburdening yourself lightens your path, broadens your cognitive horizons, and generates genuine independence. To initiate this transformative process, you can adopt 3 highly actionable behaviors designed to facilitate your internal progress. The initial phase involves clearly defining your specific burdens by dedicating a brief period to document every single grievance, regret, anxiety, and disappointment you currently harbor, ensuring you name them with absolute precision and uncompromised honesty. Following this, you must make a deliberate choice to detach from each recorded item by asking yourself if maintaining this grievance offers any genuine value to your current existence, or guides you closer to total liberation. If you conclude that it does not, you must firmly state your intention to let it go. Acknowledging that while the process may feel unfamiliar or uncomfortable, you are not required to erase the memory, but simply choosing to deny it dominion over your current behavior. To solidify this detachment, you should close your eyes, inhale deeply, and visualize the heavy energy completely departing your physical form, observing how your chest opens, your posture softens, and your intellect clears while you silently reinforce the process with a comforting internal declaration of your release and onward progress. It is vital to consistently interrogate your internal state by evaluating what weights you are harboring, how your existence would transform upon their removal, and identifying which perspectives truly belong to you versus those adopted from external expectations or past traumas. Responding with total authenticity and recording these observations allows you to revisit them whenever internal tension or familiar destructive patterns attempt to resurface, reminding you that this is a continuous mental ritual rather than a solitary event. Choosing to let go is never an indication of vulnerability. On the contrary, it represents the ultimate expression of personal power, because every single burden you discard, every thought you untether, and every attachment you dissolve directly amplifies your capacity to exist with deliberate intent. It is essential to remember to execute the release, absorb the resulting liberty, and continue advancing along your path, keeping in mind that while this segment establishes the groundwork, the upcoming portions of the text will illuminate methods for identifying cloaked psychological restraints, cultivating forgiveness, re-engineering your cognitive perspective, and embedding daily rituals that protect your emotional autonomy. I will never claim that this progression is effortless, as mastering detachment tested my resolve, forced me to confront deeply uncomfortable internal realities, and demanded consistent daily effort. Yet the precise instant I welcomed this philosophy, I successfully reclaimed governance over my existence. This shift allowed me to direct my attention, innovate, and forge deep relationships with an efficacy I had never previously conceived, granting me the capacity to offer affection without the restriction of anxiety. The practical strategies and introspective queries embedded within these pages are far from abstract concepts. Rather, they are thoroughly validated methods that I have personally executed, evaluated, and perfected, ensuring that if you approach them with sincerity and regularity, you will undeniably experience the evaporation of your burdens, the expansion of your intellect, and the steady amplification of your emotional independence. As an immediate actionable task for today, select just one specific burden from your list, document the precise reasons it no longer provides value to your life, and quietly affirm your total release and newfound liberty. Pay close attention to how your consciousness and physical body respond to this shift, recognizing that minor, unyielding movements inevitably culminate in monumental transformations, which forms the bedrock of mastering internal detachment. It is impossible to accelerate your journey forward when you refuse to unlock yourself from the elements that anchor you to the ground, a reality that became undeniable to me during a season when I clung tightly to bitterness toward a past confidant who had compromised my trust and failed our connection. Every single memory and historical interaction rotated through my thoughts like a damaged recording, generating waves of irritation, melancholy, and a persistent perception of personal inadequacy, yet I stubbornly maintained my grip on that pain. I persisted because letting go felt synonymous with total capitulation, as though abandoning the grievance meant I was conceding defeat. But the unvarnished reality is that nurturing animosity offers zero protection and instead constructs an internal fortress that confines your potential. I came to understand that my own mind had been transformed into a confinement facility, and the instrument required for my liberation resided completely within my own authority. Relinquishing a grievance is never an act of surrender, it is the definitive reclamation of your internal sovereignty, representing a conscious decision to elevate tranquility over vanity, clarity over internal noise, and evolution over stagnation. A vast majority of individuals navigate their daily lives transporting immense emotional residue without any conscious awareness, allowing remorse over historical missteps, fractured connections, or unexamined anxieties to quietly govern their current behavioral choices. This heavy energy dominates your morning reflections and accompanies you into the night, altering your daily interactions, exhausting your stamina, and severely restricting your capacity to experience existence to its absolute fullest. The primary phase of transformation requires heightened mindfulness, meaning you must identify what you are holding on to and label it with absolute specificity, whether it manifests as anger, sorrow, bitterness, or anxiety, because transferring it to paper makes the challenge entirely tangible. The subsequent phase involves intentional detachment, which can be immensely aided by visualization techniques, such as imagining yourself placing each specific psychological weight into a drifting object or a flowing current, watching it float entirely out of your reality as you absorb the resulting lightness. Cultivating forgiveness is an indispensable component of this journey, keeping in mind that pardoning another person or even your own past self does not mean you endorse historical errors, but rather that you are choosing to liberate your own consciousness. A practice that immediately rewards you with a return of clarity, vitality, and internal peace. To fortify your daily commitment to detachment, you can integrate structured reflective prompts that challenge your internal narrative, specifically investigating what weights you are currently harboring that have ceased to offer value, and analyzing the precise ways these persistent thoughts or sentiments restrict your personal expansion. A highly effective experiential strategy involves documenting your internal state by composing a candid letter to yourself or to an individual from your past, articulating the exact emotions you have accumulated, and subsequently executing a symbolic release by folding the paper, safely destroying it, or permanently placing it out of sight. Revisit this ritual as frequently as your spirit demands, anchoring the physical movement with a silent, focused declaration that you are relinquishing yesterday, stepping into absolute liberty, and advancing along your path. It is vital to recognize that every single psychological boulder you deliberately discard directly amplifies your capacity to navigate existence with profound intent, because choosing to untether yourself is never an indicator of vulnerability, but rather the ultimate expression of personal empowerment. Each deliberate act of surrender unburdens your consciousness, replenishes your vital energy, and establishes an optimal environment for mental clarity and evolution, meaning that by initiating this process through modest steps and maintaining absolute regularity, you will inevitably observe a profound shift across every single dimension of your existence. The subsequent section focuses on the critical necessity of identifying the specific elements that restrict your momentum, recognizing that a vast majority of individuals navigate life bound by unseen shackles, repetitive behaviors, and buried sentiments that quietly compromise their potential without their conscious awareness. I have inhabited that exact psychological space for an extensive duration, permitting internal skepticism to govern my trajectory, allowing anxiety to dictate my movements, and letting historical blunders distort every fresh prospect that materialized before me. Achieving absolute independence demands precise identification, because it is an absolute impossibility to untether yourself from an obstacle that remains completely hidden from your view. Dedicate a moment during your daily routine to objectively supervise your internal monologue, paying close attention to the cyclical subjects, the instantaneous interpretations, and the internal dialogue that constantly reinforces your perceived boundaries. This might manifest as an internal voice whispering that your capabilities are insufficient, that a historical setback has permanently damaged your future, or through more delicate anxieties suggesting that attempting a new path is unwise due to the potential for unmet expectations. These entrenched cognitive configurations directly construct your immediate reality, quietly dictating your behavioral responses, your choices, and your general vitality. Heightened awareness serves as the absolute cornerstone of internal transformation, because by precisely identifying these psychological and emotional blockades, you successfully reclaim the authority to chart a different course. This analytical process is entirely free from self-condemnation or internal reproach. Rather, it is about illuminating the hidden impediments that actively stall your individual development, thereby converting automated, unconscious routines into deliberate, conscious selections that allow you to distinguish between what serves your journey and what merely confines your spirit. A highly beneficial morning ritual involves documenting 3 specific perspectives or convictions that currently induce internal tension or hesitation, effectively rendering your psychological blockades completely tangible. On one specific occasion, I committed my own hidden barriers to paper, noting a perceived necessity for absolute perfection, a deep-seated reluctance to extend trust to others, and a quiet narrative that I was unworthy of achieving fulfillment. Confronting these statements in written form stripped them of their mystique, transforming them into concrete concepts that I could systematically analyze and dismantle. Following this identification, you must critically evaluate which of these perspectives represent objective reality and which are merely manufactured narratives you have repeated out of habit, keeping in mind that many limiting viewpoints are not factual truths, but comfortable frameworks we maintain simply because they feel familiar. To solidify this cognitive shift, you can employ targeted visualization methods, picturing each restrictive perspective as a tangible, heavy anchor resting heavily upon your shoulders, and then consciously watching yourself lower each individual weight to the ground, absorbing the immediate physical relief and lightness that emerges when objective truth replaces manufactured fiction. Regularly interrogate your internal state throughout the day by asking what specific narrative is restricting your clarity, analyzing how that perspective attempts to protect you versus how it paralyzes you, and recording your reflections to convert passive awareness into decisive movement. Every single insight you uncover provides a solid foothold to step entirely beyond the historical restraints of yesterday, creating an open arena for peace, intentional action, and continuous self-mastery. It is essential to remember that recognizing these internal mechanisms is never a solitary accomplishment, as the human intellect relies heavily on habit, meaning old paradigms will inevitably attempt to re-emerge over time. This recurrence is a perfectly natural aspect of growth, and the key lies in unwavering regularity. Each time an obstructive thought surfaces, simply pause, observe its presence without judgment, and intentionally select an alternate cognitive path. Over time, this disciplined observation cultivates immense internal resilience, profound self-reliance, and absolute liberation from unnecessary cognitive burdens. To maximize the efficacy of this work, you should consistently engage in dedicated reflection exercises, questioning what repetitive narrative or emotion you are carrying out of habit, evaluating how your immediate experience would alter if you discarded that weight, and determining which perspectives are genuinely your own versus those absorbed from external forces or past traumas. Arriving at entirely authentic answers illuminates the exact territories ripe for release and total metamorphosis, allowing you to notice a subtle yet profound shift in your daily perception. You will begin to view your internal reactions not as inevitable, automated outcomes, but as deliberate options, fully realizing that you possess the absolute autonomy to determine how you engage with external triggers, how you decode daily occurrences, and how you safeguard your emotional territory. This deliberate awareness fosters a deep independence of both intellect and heart, which serves as an indispensable prerequisite for achieving true psychological sovereignty. Finally, you can amplify this recognition by combining your journaling with vocal articulation, speaking your limiting beliefs aloud or recording your thoughts so you can hear yourself identify, confront, and dismantle them. This audio repetition reinforces your analytical focus and strengthens your innate capacity to detach from patterns that fail to nourish your growth, because awareness is the ultimate lens through which total liberation becomes achievable. When you possess clear knowledge of what holds you back, you hold the definitive power to dissolve it step by step, belief by belief, emerging lighter, clearer, and fully prepared to inhabit the expansive freedom that intentional release guarantees. To successfully evaporate emotional weight, you must first master the art of exposing what restricts you, as hidden convictions, anxieties, and habituated reactions operate beneath the surface of your awareness, silently sculpting your daily choices. These hidden mechanisms quietly sculpt your reactions without your conscious awareness, a restrictive reality I navigated firsthand during a prolonged season where I permitted insecurity to govern my trajectory and anxiety to dictate my behavior. Authentic liberation invariably begins with objective observation, meaning you must deliberately monitor your recurring thought patterns to identify which specific concepts generate internal tension, anxiety, or hesitation. For many, these manifest as an internal whisper declaring that their worth is insufficient, or that success is permanently out of reach, serving as psychological chains that are entirely invisible yet immense in their restriction. Documenting these perspectives on paper strips them of their internal power, as viewing them outside the confines of your mind provides immediate clarity and a heightened sense of control over your narrative. It is essential to critically evaluate these statements, questioning which beliefs represent objective, verifiable facts and which are simply comfortable stories you have repeated out of habit, keeping in mind that many limiting viewpoints are merely inherited or learned from historical events. Recognizing this vital distinction allows you to challenge those narratives consciously, a process that can be immensely reinforced through visualization techniques where you picture each restrictive thought as a tangible weight, watching yourself gently lower it to the earth and stepping forward completely unburdened. Through this practice, the intellect begins to internalize the realistic possibility of deliberate choice rather than automated compulsion. To integrate this awareness into your daily routine, you can utilize targeted prompts that investigate which recurring thought is currently restricting your movements and analyze how your actions would transform if that specific belief ceased to exist. Highly effective experiential strategies include a morning reflection where you document 3 specific concepts that generate hesitation, an evening journaling ritual to review moments where historical patterns influence your behavior while identifying empowering alternatives, and vocal recording sessions where you speak your limiting beliefs aloud before immediately stating their empowering counterparts. You can anchor these practices with a focused internal mantra, affirming that you perceive the obstacle, you release its hold, and you deliberately choose absolute independence. It is vital to remember that identifying what restricts your potential is never a solitary event, as old paradigms will inevitably attempt to resurface, making consistency the absolute cornerstone of your progress. Every instance of conscious observation and cognitive redirection directly reinforces your mental clarity, psychological resilience, and capacity for deliberate choice. From a position of personal insight, when I initially committed to identifying my own hidden barriers, I was astonished by the immense volume of vital energy I had previously squandered reacting to invisible blockades, whereas heightened awareness finally empowered me to step off autopilot, make distinct choices, and generate genuine momentum toward liberation. This recognition serves as the indispensable foundation for every subsequent practice, whether it involves dissolving historical residue, altering your mindset, establishing firm boundaries, or cultivating self-compassion, because without this initial clarity, your efforts toward emotional autonomy will remain scattered and ineffective. By maintaining a disciplined routine of observation, documentation, and deep reflection, you successfully reclaim total agency over your thoughts and emotions, creating the fertile environment where true self-mastery can flourish. The third section shifts the focus toward the deliberate dissolution of emotional baggage, comparing the accumulation of historical residue to navigating your existence with a heavy backpack tightly packed with dense stones. Every single lingering regret, unresolved grievance, or hidden conflict adds an incremental weight that actively slows your pace and obscures your cognitive vision. I have experienced this exhausting dynamic firsthand, remembering seasons when past errors or interpersonal betrayals continuously replayed within my consciousness, actively draining my vitality, fracturing my focus, and dimming my natural joy. While the burden of this psychological weight is undeniably real, the definitive authority to dissolve it resides completely within your own grasp, requiring an initial step of absolute acknowledgement. You must courageously confront what you are harboring, labeling each element precisely and committing it to writing, whether it manifests as deep bitterness toward an individual who compromised your trust, heavy guilt regarding a historical choice, an underlying anxiety about repeating past mistakes, or a deep sorrow you refuse to consciously face. Transforming these invisible emotional weights into tangible text renders them concrete, converting a vague internal ache into an objective concept that you can systematically address and dismantle. To facilitate this unburdening, it is highly beneficial to interrogate your internal state through 3 precise questions, evaluating what specific residue you continue to carry from yesterday, analyzing how maintaining this weight actively compromises your present existence, and visualizing how expansive your life would feel if you chose to let it go. Once you have clearly identified these specific burdens, the subsequent phase requires a dedication to conscious release, which can be immensely aided by picturing each negative thought or sentiment as a literal stone inside your backpack, and then visualizing yourself gently removing them one by one. Pay close attention to the immediate physical sensations that accompany this mental exercise, noticing how your chest opens, your breathing deepens, and your physical posture relaxes. Even if the underlying emotions do not evaporate instantaneously, this deliberate ritual signals to your subconscious mind that you are actively prioritizing absolute freedom over restrictive attachment. Cultivating forgiveness plays a central and indispensable role in this transformative process, though it is vital to understand that pardoning an action does not mean you excuse harmful behavior or validate injustice. Rather, forgiveness is an act of supreme self-liberation. When I chose to extend forgiveness to those who had wronged me, I experienced an immediate internal lightness, creating a vast space within my consciousness that allowed clarity and profound peace to emerge. You can accelerate this emotional unburdening through targeted practical exercises, such as composing a candid letter to an individual who caused you pain, articulating your anger, sadness, and disappointment with absolute honesty, and then executing a symbolic release by folding the paper and safely destroying it or placing it out of sight to externalize the emotion safely. Additionally, you can engage in quiet visualization sessions where you picture each emotional burden being placed onto a flowing river or inside a drifting balloon, watching it float entirely out of your reality as you absorb the resulting relief. Conclude your day with a focused reflection, identifying any specific moment where you clung to a negative emotion unnecessarily, and consciously practice releasing that energy before entering sleep to reinforce the habit of emotional freedom. Consistently prompt your awareness by evaluating what emotional weight you are harboring in the present moment that can be dissolved, and identifying which specific thought is actively preventing you from experiencing total peace today. To maximize the efficacy of this emotional clearing, you can integrate these precise prompts into your dedicated journaling routine or choose to record your voice as you engage in deep reflection, because hearing yourself articulate the act of release significantly reinforces the psychological shift. The regular repetition of focused mantras possesses immense power, and by consistently affirming silently or aloud that you are relinquishing yesterday, liberating your intellect, and selecting serenity, you gradually install an entirely new neurological configuration within your nervous system. Over time, your consciousness begins to internalize the reality that clinging to historical trauma is completely optional, meaning that transporting emotional baggage ceases to be an automated reaction, and intentional release becomes your default state of being. It is absolutely vital to expect and acknowledge a degree of discomfort during this transformative work, as buried sentiments like anger, sorrow, and grief will inevitably rise to the surface. Rather than suppressing these emerging states, simply observe their presence objectively, permit them to flow completely through your awareness, and consciously allow them to exit your reality, keeping in mind that internal resistance only serves to prolong the duration of the burden. Complete release is rarely instantaneous. It functions as a continuous practice and a rigorous daily commitment that requires patience. Reflecting on my own personal evolution, I once naively assumed that I could simply make a solitary decision to let go and immediately experience total liberty, but reality quickly demonstrated that emotions linger, historical memories resurface, and old behavioral paradigms continually attempt to reclaim control. True liberation only emerged through the steady application of repetitive habits, writing, visualizing, pardoning, and documenting, proving that it is your unwavering consistency rather than a solitary monumental effort that successfully converts emotional weight into absolute freedom. It is essential to remember that the ultimate objective of this journey is not flawless perfection, but steady, continuous progress, meaning that on certain days you may find yourself carrying a heavier load, while other days will naturally feel vastly lighter. The defining factor is your willingness to maintain conscious attention on what you are harboring, paired with intentional actions designed to execute the release, because by steadily dissolving your emotional baggage, you systematically open up vital space for creative innovation, cognitive clarity, and deep personal connection. You no longer find yourself reacting automatically to historical triggers, but instead operate from a position of conscious choice, total presence, and internal tranquility. Emotional independence is far from an idealistic or abstract theory. It is a pragmatic daily ritual where each modest act of surrender steadily compounds over time into a profound state of internal liberation. For your immediate daily task, isolate one specific emotional burden that has occupied your thoughts over the past week, define its parameters clearly on paper, and execute a symbolic ritual of release. Visualize that dense energy completely departing your physical form and consciousness while repeating your grounding affirmation of peace, paying close attention to the newfound internal space it creates, however subtle, and carrying that light sensation into your subsequent activities. The true efficacy of discarding emotional residue lies not in a denial of historical facts, but in a deliberate refusal to allow those events to dictate your present reality or sculpt your future. When you actively assume command of your psychological load, you instantly reclaim your vital stamina, your cognitive focus, and your personal autonomy, ensuring that each subsequent phase of this text will build seamlessly upon this foundation by exploring mindset transformation, boundary management, and the establishment of sustainable daily rituals. Navigating existence while carrying dense emotional residue is identical to balancing unseen weights directly upon your shoulders, where unresolved grudges, persistent regrets, and unprocessed feelings continuously deplete your stamina and obscure your perspective. I distinctly recall a period when I clung stubbornly to the intense disappointment of a fractured professional partnership, discovering that every single thought dedicated to that past failure kept my body tense and my mind highly reactive. Initiating your liberation requires an upfront acknowledgement of the specific burden, demanding that you document the exact nature of what you are transporting, whether it manifests as anger, guilt, anxiety, or deep sorrow, because viewing these sentiments in written form renders them objective and manageable. Following this, you must engage in a process of intentional dissolution, utilizing creative visualization techniques such as picturing each specific burden being placed into a rising balloon or onto a flowing current, watching it drift entirely out of your domain. Integrating forgiveness is an indispensable component of this unburdening, not because it excuses or validates inappropriate behavior, but because it actively untethers your own consciousness from the weight of the offense. The moment I extended forgiveness to those who had generated pain in my life, I experienced an immediate sense of relief, noticing that my intellect cleared instantly and my vital energy returned. Cultivate this regular clearing by examining what weights you can dissolve today, identifying which recurring emotions are disrupting your harmony, and utilizing targeted journaling exercises or letters to externalize accumulated tension, remembering that even the smallest actions executed with unyielding consistency build immense emotional resilience and absolute freedom. The fourth section introduces the profound necessity of transforming your fundamental mindset, utilizing the metaphor that your consciousness functions entirely as a garden while your thoughts operate as the primary seeds, meaning that whatever concepts you choose to nurture will inevitably dominate the landscape, whether they manifest as radiant blooms of confidence and clarity, or as destructive weeds of insecurity and anxiety. I have spent a multi-year period meticulously observing the terrain of my own intellect, noting with absolute precision how unexamined convictions and cyclical negative thoughts directly sculpted my daily behavior, restricted my professional selections, and severely depleted my vital energy. Achieving a complete cognitive restructuring invariably begins with heightened awareness, yet it can only reach full maturity through a dedication to deliberate cultivation and consistent mental care. The primary phase of altering your cognitive perspective involves precisely isolating the specific thought patterns that have ceased to offer any positive value to your evolution, which often surface as deeply ingrained convictions suggesting that your inherent worth is insufficient, that recovery from a past crisis is impossible, or that you are fundamentally undeserving of experiencing true joy. And if these concepts are permitted to remain unchecked within your subconscious, they will continue to restrict your destiny. These deeply ingrained thoughts consistently dictate your daily reactions, critical decisions, and overall emotional equilibrium, meaning that mere recognition of their existence is completely insufficient to catalyze change. You must actively and deliberately replace those destructive configurations with empowering internal narratives that systematically guide your consciousness toward absolute freedom and continuous self-mastery. I find it most effective to approach this cognitive restructuring through three highly structured phases: systematic reflection, intentional reframing, and continuous reinforcement. During the initial phase of systematic reflection, dedicate a quiet window each morning to document your recurring negative thoughts, observing these internal patterns objectively and entirely without self-judgment. Ask yourself with absolute sincerity which of these underlying beliefs represent verified, objective facts, and which are simply comfortable stories you have repeatedly told yourself out of habit. The final phase of this transformation involves continuous reinforcement, where you anchor your newly established mindset through deliberate daily habits, focused mantras, and intentional micro-actions. I utilize a straightforward yet powerful affirmation every morning, declaring that I maintain absolute control over my internal thoughts, I actively choose continuous growth, and I fully embrace mental clarity. You can amplify this practice by combining it with your journaling routine or through vocal recording sessions, speaking your affirmations aloud to hear the resonance of your own conviction. Throughout the course of your day, actively monitor your internal reactions and gently redirect any stray thought that attempts to reinforce limitation, keeping in mind that this consistent repetition physically rewires your neural pathways, making empowerment your default mental state. Creative visualization immensely accelerates this transformation. Picture yourself navigating complex challenges with absolute calm and lucidity instead of stress. Imagine engaging with others from a position of quiet confidence rather than anxiety, and consciously view unexpected opportunities as open doorways rather than intimidating barriers. By repeatedly executing these targeted mental exercises, your fundamental mindset shifts entirely from a reactive posture to one of intentional design. It is entirely natural to encounter internal resistance during this process, meaning that old paradigms will occasionally resurface, bringing waves of frustration or self-doubt. It is crucial to understand that this is never a sign of personal failure, but rather the natural mechanism of the mind recalibrating its architecture, requiring you to treat yourself as an encouraging ally rather than a harsh adversary. Acknowledge the immediate difficulty of the shift, but continuously choose thoughts that serve your ultimate evolution. Drawing strength from the personal insight that mindset transformation does not require monumental, exhausting upheavals, but is built entirely upon consistent, daily micro-decisions. Redirecting a solitary thought, selecting an empowering narrative, and practicing clarity in one isolated moment at a time creates a profound compound effect over the course of your life. Regularly prompt your awareness by evaluating which specific thought is attempting to restrict your potential today, determining how you can reframe it, and identifying the empowering narrative you choose to install in its place. Document these reflections, visualize the successful outcome, and repeat your grounding mantra, noticing over time not just an alteration in your cognitive patterns, but a total elevation of your vital energy, presence, and emotional resilience. To ensure daily transformation, you can adopt 3 highly practical exercises: morning journaling to identify a single limiting belief and document its empowering counterpart, mindful observation throughout the afternoon to catch self-critical thoughts in real time and immediately reframe them, and an evening reflection to review moments where you successfully applied these strategies. Celebrating your progress no matter how modest it may seem. Transforming your mindset is never about achieving a state of flawless perfection or completely eliminating every negative thought from your consciousness. Rather, it is about learning to choose your thoughts consciously, building an unshakable awareness, and reinforcing the exact narratives that empower your emotional freedom. With consistent daily attention and disciplined practice, you cultivate a healthy internal environment where growth, clarity, and resilience flourish completely naturally. For your immediate daily action, select one recurring negative thought today, commit it to writing, reframe it into a powerful statement of capability, and repeat it aloud 3 times with absolute focus. Visualize yourself responding with calm confidence in the exact situations that typically trigger that negative thought, observing the subtle shifts in your assurance, clarity, and energy. This is precisely how transformation takes root, thought by thought and moment by moment, ensuring that by the conclusion of this section, you recognize your mind is not a passive receiver of external circumstances, but an active participant with the power to shape its own reality. The subsequent section will guide you in practically releasing the emotional baggage that weighs down your newly empowered mindset, thereby deepening your overall transformation. Your mindset entirely dictates your perception of reality, meaning that hidden beliefs like being insufficient or unable to recover will actively sculpt your actions and outcomes. Heightened awareness remains the primary phase, requiring you to identify the specific thoughts that induce stress, fear, or doubt, and immediately reframe them into statements of growth, such as realizing you are capable and that recovery is a continuous process where you advance daily, a cognitive shift that can be immensely strengthened through regular visualization. To optimize this cognitive restructuring, picture yourself responding with absolute composure to external challenges and welcoming fresh opportunities with quiet assurance, as documenting your thoughts and immediately reframing them systematically solidifies the newly established internal narrative. Engage with a daily reflective prompt that questions which specific thought is limiting your potential today and investigates how you can reframe it, anchoring the mental shift with a grounding mantra declaring that you are in absolute control of your mind. You choose continuous growth, and you fully embrace clarity. Integrate a highly practical morning exercise where you identify a single limiting belief and document its empowering counterpart, maintaining a disciplined observation throughout the afternoon to catch old patterns in real time and gently redirect them, keeping in mind that these minor, consistent actions compound over time into a resilient mindset that fully supports your emotional autonomy. The fifth section shifts the analytical focus toward the critical necessity of establishing healthy boundaries, which serves as one of the most overlooked prerequisites for achieving lasting emotional freedom. Without clear parameters, you inadvertently surrender your vital energy, cognitive focus, and internal serenity to external obligations, individuals, and situations that fail to nourish your personal evolution. I discovered this reality through difficult personal experience, discovering that habitually agreeing to every demand out of a fear of interpersonal conflict, obligation, or guilt left me entirely exhausted, bitter, and disconnected from my authentic priorities. It is essential to understand that boundaries are never defensive walls designed to isolate your spirit from the world. Rather, they constitute a supportive framework that safeguards the integrity of your intellect and heart. Initiating this practice requires a heightened level of awareness, demanding that you explicitly question what elements drain your vitality. Identify where you feel stretched far beyond your healthy capacity, and pinpoint which specific interactions leave you feeling tense, frustrated, or resentful. These uncomfortable internal sensations function as vital indicators highlighting the exact territories where structured limits must be introduced, because without this clear acknowledgement, external pressures will silently erode your psychological and emotional well-being. I previously harbored the false conviction that asserting limits would automatically alienate others or permanently damage my personal connections, as I experienced a deep aversion to confrontation and intensely disliked delivering a negative response. Over time, however, I arrived at the profound realization that setting boundaries is never an act of hostile rejection, but an expression of absolute clarity and deep self-respect. When you precisely define your personal limits, you communicate your core values and immediate priorities with uncompromised honesty, and while certain individuals may react unfavorably during the initial phase, those who genuinely respect your worth will naturally adapt to the framework, whereas those who refuse to do so simply reveal their lack of alignment with your growth. To successfully implement and protect these healthy boundaries, you can adopt 3 highly practical behaviors within your daily routine. The primary phase requires you to identify your absolute non-negotiables, determining the specific dimensions of your existence that are completely indispensable for maintaining your mental and emotional equilibrium, such as dedicated periods for quiet reflection, physical exercise, family engagement, focused professional work, or personal creative projects. Knowing precisely which territories you refuse to compromise forms the bedrock of boundary cultivation. The subsequent phase involves communicating your established limits with absolute clarity and calm composure, articulating your boundaries entirely without a sense of internal guilt or the need for excessive explanations. For example, if an individual requests your time or assistance when you are actively dedicated to your primary objectives, you can respond with direct honesty, stating that you are unable to undertake the request at the moment due to current commitments that require your absolute focus. You owe no one a lengthy justification or defense of your choices, and employing straightforward, respectful communication actively reinforces your self-regard while commanding respect from those around you. The final phase demands that you protect your personal territory with unyielding consistency, recognizing that boundaries are only as effective as your willingness to enforce them daily, even when doing so feels intensely uncomfortable, or when external forces attempt to push past your limits. Maintaining an unwavering stance builds immense internal credibility, deep self-reliance, and long-term emotional stability. Regularly examine your daily actions by evaluating where you inadvertently surrendered your vital energy unnecessarily, and analyzing exactly how you could have asserted your boundary more effectively to strengthen your future execution. Creative visualization can immensely support the enforcement of your limits, allowing you to picture your personal energy field as a protective bubble of light that encapsulates your being, and watching yourself maintain that secure barrier during interactions where external demands attempt to intrude. This targeted mental exercise reinforces the physical and psychological application of your limits, a structure that can be further solidified through the focused repetition of a boundary mantra affirming that you protect your vital energy, you honor your personal priorities, and you say no whenever your well-being requires it. It is equally important to recognize that healthy boundaries are never static structures, but fluid frameworks that must evolve as your life priorities, relationships, and internal demands shift over time. A limit that was absolutely critical during a previous season of your life may no longer serve your current trajectory, whereas entirely new boundaries may be demanded as your consciousness expands, making flexibility within firmness the ultimate key to success. You remain fiercely consistent in safeguarding your emotional equilibrium while gracefully adapting the specific parameters to match your current reality. Conclude your day with a focused reflection exercise, reviewing your choices to identify exactly where you successfully respected your personal boundaries, examining where you permitted them to be compromised, and determining precisely what you will execute differently tomorrow to reinforce the habit. With the passage of time, maintaining these structural limits will become entirely second nature, rewarding you with heightened clarity, intense cognitive focus, and expanded emotional independence. From my own personal perspective, transitioning into this practice was incredibly daunting at the outset, as I constantly feared disappointing my peers, provoking unnecessary conflict, or being misconstrued as fundamentally selfish. However, I discovered that people ultimately extend far greater respect to authentic clarity than they do to passive compliance, and the moment I committed to honoring my limits, I felt a profound return of personal control, confidence, and internal peace. My interpersonal connections improved dramatically because our daily interactions became rooted in mutual respect rather than unspoken resentment, proving that boundaries are never restrictive limitations, but the ultimate pathway to personal liberation. By clearly defining your limits, you successfully reclaim sovereign ownership over your time, your focus, and your inner peace, constructing the essential environment required to evolve, think lucidly, and experience existence entirely on your own terms. Your fundamental mindset continuously shapes your perception of your immediate reality, meaning that hidden limiting beliefs will always attempt to dictate your actions unless you intervene. The perspective that recovery is impossible, or that you are fundamentally damaged, will continually dictate your daily actions and ultimate outcomes unless you actively intervene, recognizing that heightened awareness remains the indispensable primary phase. You must deliberately expose the specific thoughts that induce stress, fear, or underlying doubt, and immediately reframe them into empowering statements of capability, acknowledging that you are inherently adaptable and that healing functions as a continuous process where you progress steadily every day, a cognitive shift that can be immensely strengthened through regular visualization. To optimize this mental realignment, picture yourself responding with absolute composure to complex challenges and welcoming fresh opportunities with quiet confidence, as documenting your thoughts and mapping out reframed statements systematically solidifies the newly established internal narrative. Engage consistently with a daily prompt that questions which specific thought is limiting your potential today and investigates how you can reframe it, anchoring the shift with a grounding mantra declaring that you are in absolute control of your mind, you choose continuous growth, and you fully embrace clarity. Integrate a highly practical morning exercise where you identify a single limiting belief and document its empowering counterpart, maintaining a disciplined observation throughout the afternoon to catch old patterns in real time and gently redirect them, keeping in mind that these minor, consistent actions compound over time into a resilient mindset that fully supports your emotional autonomy and long-term resilience. The sixth section introduces the profound practice of self-compassion, defining it as the essential bridge that connects an analytical understanding of your mind with the actual liberation of your deepest emotions. A vast majority of individuals are incredibly quick to pass harsh judgment upon themselves, punishing their spirits for minor mistakes and constantly dwelling on perceived personal failures. I was absolutely no exception to this destructive habit, spending years criticizing every single decision I made, relentlessly replaying every misstep, and harboring the false belief that severe self-criticism was a necessary tool to motivate personal improvement. However, the unvarnished truth of the matter is that relentless self-judgment only serves to reinforce internal anxiety, stress, and self-doubt, whereas true personal growth can only commence when you treat yourself with the exact same care, patience, and understanding you would naturally offer to a cherished friend. Initiating this practice requires a heightened level of awareness regarding your internal dialogue throughout the day, forcing you to ask yourself during moments of failure or inadequacy if you would ever dare to speak to a loved one using that exact tone. If you conclude that the answer is no, then you must acknowledge that you are speaking far too harshly to your own soul, and recognizing this damaging pattern functions as the vital primary step toward cultivating genuine kindness within. I find it incredibly effective to frame the development of self-compassion around three distinct core components: absolute acknowledgement, unconditional acceptance, and dedicated internal nurturing. The initial phase of absolute acknowledgement demands that you admit the reality of your current feelings entirely without judgment, meaning that if you experience a wave of anxiety or irritation, you simply state to yourself that you feel anxious in this present moment, and that it is completely acceptable to do so. Acknowledging emotions in this straightforward manner validates your immediate human experience rather than forcing it into a state of toxic suppression. Following this, you must transition into unconditional acceptance, allowing yourself to experience your feelings fully and entirely without internal resistance, keeping in mind that resisting an emotion only serves to amplify your psychological discomfort. Instead of trapped in a cycle of thinking that you shouldn't feel a certain way, you must accept the feeling as a natural internal signal and an expected part of the human condition. The final phase involves dedicated internal nurturing, requiring you to respond to your own vulnerability with profound kindness and active care by engaging in small acts of self-soothing or encouragement. This can manifest as speaking gently to yourself, taking a mindful breath, or engaging in a comforting ritual like regular journaling or quiet meditation, where the ultimate objective is to replace harsh self-criticism with unwavering internal support. Regularly prompt your awareness throughout the day by evaluating how you are treating your inner self, explicitly questioning whether you are offering compassion or harsh criticism, while reflecting deeply on moments when you responded severely so you can consciously reframe them with absolute gentleness. Creative visualization can immensely strengthen your capacity for self-compassion. Picture yourself gently cradling your own being in your hands, speaking words of profound encouragement and deep understanding directly to your heart. Imagine your internal dialogue transforming completely from a ruthless critic into a deeply supportive mentor, as this mental rehearsal makes compassionate responses increasingly automated when you navigate real-world challenges. To ensure daily application, you can adopt 3 highly practical exercises: mirror affirmations, where you stand in front of your reflection and voice statements of support, declaring that you are doing your absolute best, that you are entirely worthy of care and kindness, and that you forgive yourself for past errors. Additionally, engage in dedicated journaling by writing a supportive letter to yourself acknowledging your ongoing struggles, revisiting the text whenever you feel self-critical, and practicing a mindful pause where the moment negative self-talk arises, you stop for 5 seconds, take a deep breath, and replace judgment with a compassionate statement affirming that you are continuously learning and growing. You can anchor this transformative practice through the focused repetition of a self-compassion mantra, affirming that you honor yourself, you forgive yourself, and you actively nurture your individual growth. It is vital to expect a degree of internal resistance during this process, as the human intellect is heavily conditioned towards self-critique and old behavioral patterns will inevitably resurface over time. This recurrence is a perfectly normal aspect of psychological recalibration, and what truly matters is your unwavering persistence. Each time you notice harsh self-talk and choose to respond with genuine compassion, you actively strengthen your neural pathways for internal kindness and resilience. Over time, practicing self-compassion becomes an automated habit that firmly protects your emotional freedom rather than undermining your potential. From a position of personal insight, I discovered that moments of true self-compassion were also moments of intense empowerment, because by choosing to be gentle with my mistakes, I gained immense clarity, sharp focus, and authentic motivation. I completely stopped wasting my vital energy on guilt and self-judgment, redirecting that stamina toward actions that truly mattered, while observing a dramatic increase in my creativity, patience, and resilience simply because I finally allowed myself to be human. For your immediate daily action, pay close attention to your thoughts and isolate one specific instance where you criticize your actions, pausing immediately to take a deep breath and replacing that criticism with a supportive statement of understanding. Repeat your grounding mantra of self-honor, forgiveness, and growth, observing how your emotional state shifts, even if the transition feels incredibly subtle at first. Practicing self-compassion is never an act of weak indulgence or an avoidance of personal responsibility. Rather, it is an indispensable skill required for achieving lasting emotional freedom, enabling you to confront complex challenges, welcome growth, and respond to life intentionally rather than reactively. Mastering this internal gentleness ensures that as you release emotional baggage, set firm boundaries, and transform your fundamental mindset, you possess the essential internal support system required to sustain these profound changes and construct an unshakable foundation of emotional resilience. Self-compassion is frequently misunderstood by society, as many individuals mistakenly believe it represents a form of weakness, avoidance, or self-pity, a false narrative I once embraced when I believed that being exceptionally harsh with myself would drive improvement, criticizing every mistake, replaying failures, and comparing my path relentlessly to others, only to realize that this criticism created intense anxiety, drained my energy, and completely blocked my emotional growth, whereas true self-compassion serves as the absolute foundation for freedom. The primary phase remains an acute awareness of your internal self-talk, requiring you to actively monitor the exact way you speak to yourself when you commit an error, identifying whether your internal voice immediately defaults to a destructive declaration,